Okay. I am going to call the meeting of the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee to order. Today is Monday, December 5th. The time is 7 p.m. and we are in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly, Chairwoman.
I'm here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens, Vice Chair.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govea.
Here.
Alderman Thomas Lopez is absent.
He is running a bit behind. So
Okay.
we can mark when he gets here.
Alderman Tebow is here. Also in attendance, we have Alderman Camo, Alderwoman Timmons, Alderman Moran, Alderman Klee, City Clerk Dan Healy, CFO Tax Collector John Griffin, and from our IT department, Nick Miservich.
And behind you?
And our esteemed attorney, Steve Bolton.
We have a full house. Okay. I'm going to open it to public comment. I don't see anyone in the public. Okay, we'll move on. Communications.
There is none.
Interviews.
There is none.
We don't have any applications to license hawkers, peddlers, enter with vendor licenses.
Nope.
I've never seen that ever. Appointments by the mayor.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the following reappointments to the Citizens Advisory Commission for Community Grants: Oscar Velatsis and Jason Tulerski, with terms to expire December 1st, 2025.
You've heard the motion. Is there discussion on that motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
I just want to make a note that Alderman Lopez has arrived at 7:01.
Welcome, Alderman Lopez. Okay, unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
There is none.
New business ordinances.
We have O-22-36, increasing the disabled tax exemption. I would like to recommend final passage on that.
Okay, great. Alderman Moran, is that why you're here? This looks like
Yes,
it's your
that's
piece of
why I'm here.
legislation. Would you like to speak to it to start? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So essentially this ordinance, the board approved expanding the tax credit for the elderly, and I thought we should also do that for the disabled populations in the city. There's also an amendment before you that I believe Alderman Govea is going to recommend shortly to increase the income limits to thresholds to be in compliant, kind of similar to what the 8% COLA increase that Social Security beneficiaries are going to have. So if you get that 8%, you're not going to lose your exemption. So the amendment, I know we're not talking about it at the moment, but it kind of firms up everything nicely, what was going to happen with the same thing with the tax for the elderly exemptions. But I think it's a great thing that we can offer this and increase it to the people who are disabled in the city.
Thank you, Alderman Moran. Alderman Govea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to attempt this amendment here for Alderman Moran. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I will move to amend, making it so in Section 2, it owns net assessed not in excess of $150,000, excluding the value of the person's actual residence in the land upon which it is located, up to 2 acres. And then in the next sentence, starting from April 1st, 2023 tax year, owns net assessed not in excess of $162,000, excluding the value of the person's actual residence in the land upon which it is located, up to 2 acres. Is that correct?
Item 1, 2.
Okay, Alderman Govea. I see a couple of underlined things. It seems like there's multiple amendments here. Is that true?
Item 1
Alderman?
and 2.
So under 1A, anything in underline, I think Alderman Govea is
My apologies, yes. So in item number 1, it would be amending to say, starting in the calendar year preceding April 1, 2023, had a net income for all sources of not more than $54,000, or if married, a combined net income for all sources not more than $54,000.
And one more on the front.
Madam Chair?
I'm gonna see if I can clarify.
As
Yeah,
a point
please
of
do.
order, can we just amend to the version that we were?
That was what I
given
was going
instead
to say.
Yeah.
Why don't we just amend to the copy that was passed out to us? We'll include it in the record.
Perfect.
And then we can just quickly bump over them. So is your motion to amend to the copy that we received at the beginning of the meeting?
Absolutely.
Great, okay. So Alderman Moran, it looks like the changes are in 1A, bumping it from 223,000 to 256,000 for the tax year 2024. And then Alderman Govea had the other pieces right. The calendar year has a net income of not more than 54,000. I saw that. And then that last one about not exceeding 162,000. Those are all of the amendments, correct?
Yeah, and that, Madam Chairwoman, just where you, section 1A, the $223,000 in tax year beginning April 1st and 256 in tax year beginning April 1st, 2024.
So it's in a tiered, okay.
Tiered, yeah.
Okay, great. Are there questions on the amendment? I'm not surprised there are. Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, this would be amending 1A, and then on the back, it would be section 1 and then 2 with the underlined?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Clemmons, and then
So-
Alderman Lee.
Thank you. So I understand what the amendments on the back are, the income bracket, and I understand that one. And to a certain degree, the second one, but can you explain where the numbers came from for the amounts on the front in section A? So going from 194 to 223 and then to 256?
Alderman Moran, I believe you said that was a COLA increase,
Yeah.
the cost
No.
of living, is that
No.
correct?
Can I defer to Alderman Clee?
Alderman Clee.
I
Thank
just,
you.
for the record, I did kind of mimic what she was doing with the tax for the elderly exemption, so it's really her baby on this one.
Okay, great, Alderman Clee.
1A is just actually what Alderman Gouvet, Alderman Como, and Alderman Sullivan did with the elderly tax exemption, bringing those numbers up. That's all 1A is. It just, they had already done it with the elderly tax exemption, brought it from 194 to 223 and 256 in a tiered approach. That's all this is doing, is just kind of keeping that within the same level. That's all 1A is. On the back side of 2A1 and 2, that is the 8% Social Security that will be coming soon to your committee relative to the elderly tax exemption, bringing up those thresholds of the net income and the threshold of the value of a personal, of assets, I should say. When I did this for the elderly, I had brought it to the attention of Alderman Moran, who I knew had this one pending, and said, seeing we were kind of creating one, what was his feeling about doing the same thing, and he immediately said yes. Prior to my contacting him, I had spoken to Mr. Griffin and asked him if he felt that 8% was good. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but paraphrasing, I believe he said that using a strong federal percentage, such as the Social Security COLA, was a good start and a good, something we could hang our hat on. And what this does is it doesn't increase the number who would be qualified, but it helps to not exclude those who could have been hurt when that COLA comes in January. I had been contacted by a number of elderly who said, come January, when I get my 8% COLA, I'm going to be over that $50,000 threshold. So in talking with Mr. Griffin and so on, I felt that it was a strong number, that we were increasing it. And at least at this point, I don't believe that there would be, obviously new people move into the city or suddenly qualify that didn't qualify before. I don't think it's gonna make anybody qualify that didn't qualify before, but we won't lose anybody who qualified, and that's the key, is not to hurt anybody who's already been qualifying, and so not to, again, put words in someone else's mouth, I think the same thing here is with the disabled, so we don't hurt anybody that is on social security, seeing that that is probably what the majority of people are in.
Alderman Clemmons, and then, did you have anything? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and I, just to reiterate that, or to back up what the previous speaker just said, you know, I agree with that, because basically this is to make sure that if your only source of income is Social Security, then you get that 8% bump. You're not gonna be bumped out of the income bracket to qualify for this. So I think it makes sense, and I agree with it.
Great. Additional questions? Alderman Lopez, then Alderman Kamal.
One question, I think, for Attorney Bolton. In 1C, it says, on the back page, it says that the amount of any of the following should be deducted, including the proceeds from sale of assets. If a car is repossessed, that doesn't count as the sale of an asset, right?
For federal income tax, it does.
Okay, so that's one concern that I have, is like, if people are struggling with income and the disabling condition, and they have things that are already being taken away from them, it seems like it's kind of a double hit to then also take that out of their eligibility
Well,
for taxes.
I mean, the dollar amount might be a loss, right?
Okay, so you're saying that it wouldn't be added to it, it'd be subtracted, that's.
Well, when you subtract a negative number, the resulting total goes down.
So, you would say it counts as a sale, but they would lose money that way? It's in reference to a
Well-
sale of an asset?
That is not something that's provided for either in our ordinance or state law. State law says we have to establish a maximum income and a maximum level of assets. How one figures a repossession of an automobile, there's no law on that at all.
Okay, so that would be my only question here, is if that were calculated by our tax department, so maybe that would be more of a question for them. And I don't like the idea of a person having to claim a life insurance and then have that added to it, because, I mean, it means someone just died. And admittedly, some people come out of that situation kind of rich, but other people look at it trying to decide whether they're going with their home, so.
Yeah,
We just have those concerns.
With respect, Alderman Lopez, yes, the state statute could have been made a lot more complicated to try and deal with all these eventualities. It's not. You're required to establish a maximum income and a maximum asset, not including the value of the residence. That's all you have the authority to do. You can't go around and making special rules for life insurance and repossessions and those sorts of things. So,
Okay, and I
It's
will
not
also
perfect,
say,
but
I
it's
think
all
you
you
just
can do.
answered something else too. I misunderstood which was the state and which was I understood that the front side is an ordinance. I thought the back side was an attachment to what we were doing, but it's actually just a reference to the state's statutes.
no, but you can't do anything without state enabling legislation. The state enabling legislation allows you to grant exemptions from property tax to people of a certain age or people with disabilities. But there are state statutes that say what someone has to do to qualify for either of those. And if you want to do that, the state says you have to set what the level of exemption will be and what your asset test and your income test will be. So what the ordinance does is do the things you're allowed to do, but it's all in accordance with state statute.
I guess my last question, without belaboring the point, is if for C, we were hypothetically to say proceeds from sale of assets excluding repossessions, that would be something we could do?
You are not allowed to do that.
Okay.
All set, Alderman Lopez?
No, I'm confused, but it doesn't seem like I can do anything that I
want
wanna do.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, and thank you, it looks like Alderman Clee wants to respond to that, so I will defer if
Yes.
that's fine with you, and
Alderman
I'll
Clee.
ask my question after.
Thank you, Alderman Como. Yes, the Chapter 72, subsection 37B, this is specifically taken from that, and that number, Roman numeral 3, I believe, A3, very specifically, the exact words are proceeds from the sales of assets. We are not putting words in that don't exist. It's, as Attorney Bolton said, it is the state statute, so it's 72:37-B that explains the exemption for the disabled. And there's a like one for the elderly, which would say basically the same thing, and that's 72:39A, where it speaks to these items, and we don't have it, as Attorney Bolton said. We are a Dillon state, the Dillon rule state, sorry, and as such, we do not get to make the decisions. The state puts through things called enabling legislation and gives us parameters as to where we have wiggle room. The only wiggle room we have is in the thresholds for asset, for income, and for the actual exemptions themselves. And in these two, they decide what is and what isn't. And I did speak to our assessing department and tax department and legal department, and they were very clear, we can't change a word of those. That's exactly how it's written right there in the statutes. As frustrating as it is, and I understand where you're coming from.
But these are things that get deducted in
Right.
order to determine the net income. So you don't count proceeds from life insurance against the person, and you don't count the proceeds from the sale of assets against the person. You subtract those from the grand total.
All set. Alderman Clee? Alderman Cabot?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a quick question, kind of related to the legislation we just passed on the elderly exemption. Some of the feedback that I've gotten from constituents is I got a lot of questions about why the single person income is the same as the married income, and wondering why the married income isn't a higher value. So I just noticed that it was the same on this one, so I'm curious if maybe that's a better question for CFO Griffin, but
CFO
just curious.
Griffin, do you have, no?
Attorney Bolton.
I know.
Bolton?
Law doesn't require this. You don't have to do it this way. It is done this way out of concern that was raised a number of years ago when one of a married couple would die. Their income then was gone, right? Computed for the single person who was the surviving spouse, they no longer met the lower figure for the single person. So it was determined that the city should establish it for the couple as what an appropriate level, and then when one of them died, the level stayed the same, didn't get decreased. So you imagine a widower, she loses her husband, loses his pension or Social Security or so forth, is struggling besides, and now she no longer qualifies for the elderly exemption. So that's the situation that's trying to be avoided by having a single limit.
Does that answer your question, Alderman Cabot?
Thank you.
Other questions? The motion currently on the floor is to amend. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Do we have another motion?
As a point of order, could we just clarify for anyone who might have been watching that not everybody present has a vote, which is why you just heard a lot less loud voice, just in case anyone's not a regular watcher.
Sure. We need a motion to,
I'd like to make a motion for O-22-036. The motion is for the increasing of this disabled tax exemption as amended, to recommend final passage.
Okay. You've heard the motion. Are there questions on that? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Okay, I believe we are taking a number of things off the table this evening. Start with the first one.
Yeah. I'd like to make a motion to take off the table, 0-22-027, updating the ordinances regarding taxi cab licensing.
The motion is to remove from the table. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we have it before us now, O-22-027. I believe City Clerk Dan Healy is here to speak on this ordinance.
So Dan Healy, City Clerk, I'm here to speak on O-22-027. So the reason for this ordinance is to just kind of clean up the process when someone comes to apply for a taxi cab or a chauffeur license. So right now, they come in, they get the application packet from us, from the city clerk's office. And in that application, they're subject to a criminal background check and a motor vehicle check. The current process is that the applicant fills that out, we notarize it for them, and then we either send it to the state or we drive it up to Concord ourselves. And right now, the criminal record check is $25, the motor vehicle check is $15, and the city pays for both of those. And the city also goes and retrieves the record. So I've tried a few different ways. I've gone up to Concord and I've sat in the DMV lobby for a few hours for the application to be processed, and we've tried mailing it. We currently have, I think, 5 or 6 applications out in the mail that we mailed about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And these people are coming in and they're asking the status, but we're waiting for the state. So this ordinance is proposing that they come in, either you can get the application for criminal record check and motor vehicle check online. So they could go prior to Concord and get their own record, or they could come in, we would give them the application, we could notarize it for them, and then we'd hand it back to the person applying, and then they would be responsible for retrieving their records and bringing them to us. And once we have everything, and if the person is approved, staff then sends them for a drug screening. So this is, the intention of this ordinance is to kind of streamline the process and put more of the responsibility on the person to bring their background check, their motor vehicle check to us. It would save the city about $40 an application to do it this way. So currently, if everything's approved, so if they have no criminal convictions and we approve the application, they pay $52. But if they're not approved, they don't pay anything. So to run the background check and to do all this, it's time in the city clerk's office, and we're paying $40. So we're getting nothing in return if they're denied. And if they do get approved, we're making $12 off of this. So I looked at similar communities, and this is kind of a standard way of doing it, that it's more on the applicant to then bring the information to the city clerk's office. We review it, make sure there's no criminal convictions, send them for the drug screening, and then they can come back and get their license. I think if it's done this way, it would be a much quicker turnaround time. It would save the city a little bit of money. I think people will be happier because we do have people coming in now and they're wondering what the status of their application is. And we said, we mailed it a few weeks ago to the state. We haven't got it back yet. So it's delaying them. And I think there's just a quicker process for this. So that's the purpose of this ordinance.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I haven't made the motion yet. I'd like to make a motion to recommend O-22-027, updating the ordinances regarding taxi cab licensing for final passage.
We just needed to formally make the
Yeah,
recommendation.
I apologize for not attending the previous meeting.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you for being here now and for explaining it. I think that was what the committee was hoping to hear. I'm gonna open it up to questions from the committee. Alderman Govea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question through you to the city clerk. This sounds great. Any way to make something flow faster and more efficient? Sounds good to me. Just out of curiosity, how many of these applications do we see?
Since I started in July, end of July, I want to say we have 6 to 8 since then. I believe the renewal starts in April. So these would be newer people applying for licenses. So I don't know how many in total the city has. That's coming up in a few months, but since I've started, I'd say between 6 to 8 applications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are you all set, Alderman Govea?
Yes.
Can I have a follow-up question?
I had Alderman
Oh, okay.
Camo next, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't get to vote on this tonight, but it sounds like a no-brainer. I can't believe you go and sit up in Concord to get these applications for people. That's crazy. Every time I've ever had to fill one out for a job or anything like that, like you said, the responsibility should be on the applicant. So hopefully this goes through tonight, and I look forward to voting on it when it comes before the full board.
Thank you, Alderman Camo. Alderman Timmons?
Thank you. I have one question out of the 608 that is sent up to the state. How many come back denied?
So far, I believe we've had one come back denied, and we're still waiting, I want to say, on four or five of them to come back.
So the percentage is relatively low, right?
It appears that it would be relatively low. We haven't had many actually come back yet, but we did have one that we sent out a denial letter.
All set, Alderman Timmons?
Thank you.
Anyone else from the committee? Okay.
Thank you.
The motion before us is to recommend final passage. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion carries.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to remove from the table O-22-028, requiring non-public sessions to be entirely in person.
Motion is removed from the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is off the table.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage for O-22-028, requiring non-public sessions to be entirely in person.
Motion is for final passage. Open it up to discussion and questions. And Alderman Tebow.
Yeah, since I was the one that put this on here originally, we had talked about it before, we debated it, and we wanted to have IT come in and legal come in and kind of speak to our debate. And, you know, my reasoning before it was I honestly just thought it was safer to have everybody in a non-public session behind closed doors. That's my reasoning. Because prior to COVID, everything had been behind closed doors in a session like this. So that was my intent, and when we had it, and he can speak to it himself, but Alderman Clemens was concerned about the security risks. I know since then we also have a letter which is in record somewhere from Alderman Camo, that research that he did. And we just wanted to put it on the table until we could get somebody in here. So I don't know if we want Mr. Misevich to speak first, or do we want to debate it first?
I think that if the committee members who had questions want to put a question out, I'll bring either Attorney Bolton or Misevich forward to speak to it. Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would prefer to hear from Mr. Misevich and Attorney Bolton first, just to see what, I mean, my question is, what is their recommendation? So that's my question through you to them.
We'll start with Mr. Mizovich. Go
All right,
ahead.
thank you, Madam Chair. Nick Mizovich, Chief Information Officer for the City of Nashua. Zoom has, built-in security measures, such as, requiring a meeting room ID with the phone number. You can also change that every meeting. I don't believe that's the practice that is currently used by the city. Unfortunately, since we post the Zoom meeting, it doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant, whether it's the same meeting number or a different meeting number. So we're kind of, going against the built-in security in that aspect, but that's because we have to for the reason that we're using it for.
Why am I raising a hand to myself? I'm sorry. My question was around, when we do non-public, do we publish that information? I feel like we don't. Like, nobody has that meeting ID. It's
We
not
do.
part of, it doesn't have to be part of the public
Just we do.
record.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Alderman?
No.
I'm sorry, no?
You cannot just have a non-public session. You have to have a meeting. It has to be a public meeting. It has to be convened in public. It has to be noticed. If Zoom capability is going to be used, if it's going to be open to the public by Zoom, you have to provide the information necessary to sign in. If you were only going to be using Zoom for members of the body who, for whatever reason, cannot be present, then you only have to provide those persons with the Zoom information. I think and Nick would certainly know more about this than me, but it gets more complicated when you're trying to switch from one format to the other format in the middle of the meeting. You basically have to end one Zoom session, start another Zoom session. The people who you're going to admit to the non-public session have to have the right credentials and codes and so forth to get in. It seems like when we've used Zoom in connection with public meetings and aldermen and other things, we seem to have run into continuing difficulties with glitches for one reason or another. So I think that's one of the concerns that perhaps some people have. As far as legal issues, you can decide to allow members who cannot be present to participate by phone, by Zoom, by some other electronic means. If you know you're going to have a non-public session, you can provide them with the passwords and codes and so forth in advance. Very often, in practice, and really as contemplated by the statute, you don't know when a non-public session is going to occur. As a practical matter, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's another thing that could mess you up at times and not allow you to do what you'd prefer to do on a specific occasion. Most of this is not governed by law, and it's some of the practical issues that I have seen, and that's all. But
I'm gonna actually ask a follow-up. So I just wanna, so you're saying that if it's open to the public, it has to be published, but since we got rid of the ability for the public to be open and attend by Zoom, the only people who would ever have the information would be aldermen, when requested. That is correct, I believe. Okay. So it actually wasn't a question, it was a clarification. Alderman Tebow, go ahead.
So my question to Attorney Bolton through the chairwoman. So people, obviously I'm newer, so that was the first non-public session I've been to. But I was told that during these non-public sessions, if we write notes, the notes get taken away. It's very strict on what we can do, and if people are at home, obviously you can't take their notes away. Is that something that is done, or is that just kind of hearsay, or, because I haven't gone through it?
I've never seen notes be taken away.
Okay.
I don't read the statute to require that. If you're taking notes of something during a non-public session, those notes are not discoverable.
Okay.
Are there other questions for IT or legal? Other questions in general? Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Attorney Bolton, when I first came on the board, we were only doing the telephone, and we were going to have a non-public session. I was aware there was a non-public session, but I could not make it, and I was told I could not call in to that. Was that just, we had I don't know, for lack of a better term, a gentleman's agreement that only those that were physically in could attend, that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any written protocol in that regard, and I don't know who told you that, and it certainly was not me.
Alderman Clee?
He's not here to defend himself anymore, so I will not throw his name under the bus. But I was able to go to the city clerk's office and read and see the attachments and everything that happened to that particular one. So I wasn't excluded from the information. I wasn't just able to be part of the conversation. So, thank you.
Alderman Clemmons?
Question through you to Mr. Mizovich. So hypothetically, it's a non-public meeting. So, or at least the portion of the portion of the meeting that's non-public, let's put it that way. The Zoom would presumably start after the non-public session began. So we go into non-public, we start the Zoom. Who from your office or who from the city would have that Zoom link and the code and everything, and how would it be distributed to the aldermen?
Mr. Mizovich?
That would be whoever is running the meeting. I mean, IT doesn't set these meetings up for the board. The board sets them up themselves. So I would say whoever the clerk is for that particular meeting would distribute that information.
Alderman Clemmons, follow-up?
Yeah, my follow-up is there do you have a concern with, at all, with an email being sent out with that link? In other words, what's our culpability there? So if we were to be hacked or something like that and somebody was able to get into the Zoom, would you foresee that being a possibility, or what would be on the user end of that, would we be able to see that somebody who shouldn't be there was in there?
It's always a possibility. I mean, email is not secure at all. My recommendation would be to, utilize the waiting room function in Zoom, like is done now. The moderator has control over who's allowed into the meeting or not. But as far as IT's recommendation, we would suggest not using Zoom, not because of security, but more because of human error. There's a potential chance that, that meeting doesn't get shut off in the broadcast. That's would be my bigger concern.
Alderman Clemmons, follow-up?
Yeah, I guess the my concern is around Zoom, and my concern is around the fact that a link is being emailed out. As Mr. Mizovich said, maybe in the TV room it's being left on accidentally or something, a human error, right? I don't think anybody would, to be clear, I don't think anybody would do anything intentional. But maybe a compromise to this would be going old school and using a phone. Because not online, it's a telephone number. The clerk would have to pick up the phone, we recognize the voice on the other end. I don't know, just throwing out there.
Alderman Cleve, then Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My concern, and I know I brought it up in the past, is our GTV staff. I have spoken to them, and the reason this came about was because of a finance meeting that I chaired. And there was, I don't want to say panic because they're professionals, they don't panic, but there was concern on how do they stop it, because everything goes through them in order to be able to do the recording and so on. And they can leave the room, but housekeeping does have access to get in there. There were just a number of issues, and I have spoken to them, and we probably should have asked them to be here as well. And I don't want to see it get tabled for that, but I can tell you that, you know, after having spoken to them, after we were running around trying to figure out how we could do this, you know, they said, well, we'll turn the volume down, we'll, you know, and so on. I trust them implicitly, but there were a lot of, we don't know what's going to happen, and they could not guarantee me that we were secure from that area as well. We went through it. I don't think there was any issue in that, but the recording continued. You know, I mean, I shut it off here at this end, but I do think it is a problem. I don't think that, and I mean nothing against anybody from CTV or IT. I think everybody is intelligent. I think we all know that, but it's still a new type of medium, and I really think we should go back to the telephone. The telephone does allow for 2 people to come in at one time. I don't know whether or not you would know whether or not we could increase that to have more than 2 lines come in at a time. If this had happened on the fly, it didn't. We knew that day. I think we knew hours, and I made as many phone calls as I could to the aldermen to let them know that we were going to have a non-public so that everybody could be included and no one would be excluded from it. But would we be able to increase more than 2 lines coming in first off?
We would need to research that.
Okay, thank you. But I do think that we're still in unknown territory. Maybe we'll never have another committee style of non-public. Maybe it'll always be a board of aldermen. I don't know. This was the first one that I ever had to chair. And there was a lot of kind of sitting here, let's hope that we've got this right kind of thing going on. So, thank you.
So I have a question, and then I know there's a bunch of hands. To Alderman Clee's point around turning it off, if you're on the telephone, they still have to turn it off, right? There's still the same sort of mechanisms when we go into a non-public.
Yeah, that's, you know, things do have to be turned off. But it's, you know, who's turning it off? I am not aware of who's turning it off, whose responsibility is to turn off. Is it, you know, here in the chamber? Is it back in the booth? That I don't know.
But is there something, and Alderman Clee, I'll let you respond
Right.
because this is something you have talked to. Is there something different about turning it off, whether it's Zoom or the phone?
Should not be.
Alderman Clee?
I don't mean to be contradictory, but it is. The difference is Zoom goes through GTV. The telephone, I don't believe, goes through GTV. It comes directly to here. And that was what the problem was. If they shut it off there, then no one could Zoom in. It doesn't just sit in this tiny little room here where the telephone does. That is kind of the difference, and yes.
Alderman Clee, what did they do during the pandemic? Because we had non-publics.
I can address that.
I can't answer that. I can just tell you what GTV told me. But I think maybe Alderman,
Comments, go ahead.
Yeah,
and I think Mr. Microsoft.
And I can tell you what we did prior to Zoom. So when an alderman would call in to a meeting, the telephone there has a speakerphone on it, and basically you just call in. Usually Sue Lovering would answer the phone, and you're on speaker, okay, and the meeting would start, and it's literally just a speakerphone, and it would sit there. So it had nothing to do with IT. It was just you called in there, whoever was sitting at that desk would pick up the phone, And then it would literally, your voice would be carried over through the microphones here, very old school, and no one else had to get involved. So the other thing I will say too, just a quick point on that, was that we once had more than 2 aldermen participate, and I believe that we had them call another alderman's cell phone, or it was Miss Lovering's cell phone, and literally sat there on speaker underneath the microphone. And so there's ways to do it. I mean, it'd be preferable to get another line or something like that, but we've done it.
Thank you, Alderman Clevens. I don't know the order of hands.
Mr. Mc.
You did
Mr.
announce me,
Messerich had it.
like, I think several generations of Trish will go, just so you know.
I'm sorry, Alderman Lopez?
I said you did actually name me as the next person, several
Okay,
generations.
Alderman
of
Lopez,
Alderman.
go ahead. I'm sorry, I lost track.
Mr. Michaelovich, I just wanted to double check. You'd said earlier that it's not the city's policy to change the meeting ID number along with the meetings?
Yeah, I don't believe so. I believe
so-
it's,
So my question to Attorney Bolton would be, can somebody write to know a past announcement of a non-public session to one of our alderman emails and get all that information?
I don't follow the question. Can someone make a right to know request for what?
For like an email from 6 weeks ago if we had a non-public, which would then have the same information that we would use to do a non-public now.
Offhand, I can't think of any exception that would prevent that email from being produced. All we have to do is keep changing the code.
Yeah, so that was my next
For,
comment, is maybe we
well,
should do that every now
really,
and
it's
then.
what you're supposed to do for security reasons. Every single meeting should have a separate code.
All set, Alderman Lopez?
One further observation,
Sure.
phones were commented on, and this is a little bit of splitting hairs, but if you call into the meeting and you were supposed to be in the meeting and you call in, then we know you, we know your voice, we let you in the meeting, but you can totally split your calls off into multi-user things on your end. But that is different from maybe somebody happening onto the Zoom or discovering the way to it, because it would mean that a sitting alderman has to literally conference call somebody in who shouldn't be in there.
And I would add to that, that if Zoom keeps CTV there, otherwise they could go home when we go into non-public.
Mhm.
Or they have to wait till we have to come back. I think they have to wait to come back anyways. So we have to come back. Okay. Alderman Govea and then Alderman Timmons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be open to the compromise of using telephones should we decide to go that route. I feel it mitigates that threat of, the exterior. It keeps everything inside the horseshoe here. Would I prefer it to be Zoom? I think I would, just because it's the face-to-face interaction, but I understand some of the aldermen's concerns with the platform itself. But if, we wanted to go the route of bringing it old school to using just phones and calling in for a non-public, I'd be open to that, because my whole objection to the ordinance as written was it took away an alderman from trying to do their job in a non-public, whether they're here or not. And, at least if they're on the phone, they can still have a voice and still vote and still represent the city or their ward to the best they can. So if it was to go that route, I think I would support it still, because it covers what my big objection was to it, is it takes away a vote or takes away a viewpoint. And I feel, at least being on the phone, you can still get that across. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Govea. Alderman Timmons, then Alderman Cole.
Thank you. I'm new on the board, Alderman. However, on the Board of Education, when something was non-public, it was just that. We were in person. And we sealed the minutes after the non-public was over. And I was asking this, do we seal the minutes after the non-public is over here as well?
Yes.
You should, if you have the grounds to do so. There are 2 specific reasons under which minutes can be kept confidential, and you have to cite which reason. So.
Okay. Also, when we never did vote in non-public. That's number 1. 2, we did give things to the board, and we did take things back because we did not want it exposed on the outside. It was a non-public, so things did get distributed to us, and they were taken back from us. That's how the Board of Education worked, and it seemed to be more secure. We was in person, and if you wasn't there, you still got the information from the chair. So it was not a big problem. So Alderwoman Kelly would tell that particular person that's not there what was non-public about without putting it in an email or anything like that. We still found out what it was about.
All set, Alderman Timmons? I think Mr. Mizovich wanted to weigh in on something and I missed you.
No,
Go
that's
ahead.
fine, Madam Chair. Concerning the phones, the phone lines, it used to simply be a telephone years ago.
Now it's FaceTime.
It's been upgraded, and I believe it is integrated with the equipment in the back room now.
So no difference. Okay. Alderman Camo?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple of notes really quick. One, to piggyback off of that, I just looked up the random sampling of meeting notices from earlier in the year, and the Zoom and telephone information is the same, but it's different for every meeting that I looked at. So I pulled up a half a dozen meetings in the last 5 minutes, and they all had unique meeting IDs and passcodes. So I think it'd be unlikely that you could pull up a previous email and then find your way into a future meeting. In response to something that Attorney Bolton said a while ago about, we might not always know that these are happening, and that might be unfortunate, but, in the case of the finance meeting, luckily we did know in enough time to get 2 links. We had a link for the regular meeting, we had a link for the non-public meeting. If that wasn't the case, and just say something came up tonight and you had to go into non-public tonight, well, then that's an unfortunate thing for anyone who's not here, but it's not something you can anticipate or get around, and I don't see that this solves that problem. I think that it's, we're talking about aldermen calling people and putting cell phones on speakerphone, and it's like, I don't know, I don't support this. I don't think that's a surprise based on my comments from the previous meeting, but, it seemed like the temperature the last time we talked about this was around the security of the software. And that seemed to be a fairly common sentiment that I heard that night. And it seems like now we've moved away from the security of the software, and now we're talking about we don't trust the TV people to shut the TV off. I mean, at a certain point, you have to trust the people that you're supposed to trust. I trust everyone here to do what they're supposed to do. If we ask them to turn the TV off, I trust that they're gonna turn the TV off. But if we have nobody on Zoom and nobody on telephone, and we go into non-public tonight, we still have to trust them to turn the TV off. So I don't see how this solves any of those problems. It just, I don't know, that's where I am on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Camo. Did you have your hand up? Okay. Alderman Moran, then Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Other than betraying the trust of your constituents, is there a penalty for an alderman who were to throw someone else on the phone without us knowing, and then it come out later, or sharing information about a non-public session?
Be a violation of the oath, and you could be removed from office.
If you find out.
Well, let's say there's discovery and text messages come through in a certain lawsuit.
Or someone talks too much in public comment.
The other question I would have, what about the folks that work in the back? Is there a penalty for them if they got that information and shared it? Would their employment be at risk or anything like that?
I think their employment might be at risk.
I
don't expect that would happen.
When there's penalties, it's a deterrent to share such information. So I think the fact that you might be removed from office or lose your job is a pretty good deterrent for a lot of people.
You were next, Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Madam President, or Madam Chairwoman. So, when I first put this out there, when I talked to people, it was like, oh yeah, we can't let anything out. They take our paper away, they close the doors. No one said, I thought prior to the pandemic, there was no phones, everybody had to be in the room, but it sounds like we don't care as much. So I'm still gonna vote for it. It's my ordinance. I think, I don't know why someone feels the need that if they can't be here for whatever reason, they can't be here. It happens all the time. I mean, people can't be here, they're on vacation, or they have an emergency, or whatever comes up, and they're not here. I just don't think why it's so crucial that if they couldn't be here for this, like, we gotta get them on something that's not as safe as being in the room. You know, and if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass, but I would hope that at least we can get commitment that whoever of us can't make that meeting, and it could be me, that we're on Zoom, that we at least show ourselves and not hide behind shutting off the camera. I think we need to be at least face to face. I don't know why you're smiling. You weren't the only one. So I'm talking to everyone, just like if it was me.
You should debate the legislation and not address me directly.
Please,
I didn't address you directly.
please do not address each other directly. Thank you. Are you all set, Alderman?
No, I'm not all set. So, yeah, I don't know why someone would have their camera off. If you were in a non-public session, why aren't we speaking face to face? I don't get that. And so that's where my trust comes in. If people have to go dark, is your husband behind there? Is a spouse behind there? Is a kid behind there? Is who's behind there that could hear the stuff that, because I'll tell you, this city is not tight with information. It's not. You know, I send stuff to my constituents that gets to all kinds of people that it shouldn't get to. And I wouldn't be surprised if you guys get it. So I'm sorry if I don't trust people. I want to trust everybody, but it's not just the aldermen. It's people that could be in the background. It is what it is. And I think Alderman Clemens makes a good point too. Great, Zoom's safe, but email's not. You're emailing the link to people. That's not safe. People get hacked all the time. Companies get hacked. Why couldn't we get hacked? You know, I mean, our IT guy said email is not safe. So, I don't know. Okay, I'm done.
Alderman Clemens and Alderman Clay.
Thank you. I mean, so knowing that it's not a landline in here, and I understand why it's not. It's probably more expensive and it's less, whatever. But I don't know. I'm going with my original thought, which is that we should be in person unless we can figure out a way to make it so that it's not connected to the room up there, and it's not over the internet. If we can figure out, if we can figure out a way that it's not over the internet and it's not, it's not through internet protocol and it's secure in here, then I might consider something different. But unless we can figure that out, then I'm going to support the ordinance as it's written.
Alderman Clay.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A question had come up before about that we had a non-public session during COVID, and we did. And I remember even prior to that meeting speaking to Jeff, and he said, I'm just gonna have to turn the volume down, and not one of us mistrusted him. Not one of us mistrusted the person that was in the booth the day of the Finance Committee meeting. They felt the angst of it as well. And they felt that it was going through their system. We do have this Cisco phone system, which it's VoIP, everything comes through the internet. And I know that I helped put a phone system like that into the VA hospital. So I do know it's very programmed, it's very, I believe it is secure, but yet it does go through that. I wasn't even thinking that it wasn't coming directly here, that it was actually going through them as well. The difference here is that when we normally have a non-public session, they leave the room and they go home, which they actually did do that night. The problem is housekeeping can go in. And again, I agree, we have to say we trust people. But we've had issues. We've had issues in IT with a person who shouldn't have done something that they did. Not someone who worked for IT, someone outside of IT. We can't control what we can't control. We can control everybody that's in this room. And I know I even remember hearing something about, someone said, well, someone could sit out and listen through the doorway. Yeah, they could. And are we gonna post a guard there? Probably not. I know I don't want to be the guard being telling people get away from the door.
You need two guards.
Right, we need 2 guards, 1 on each side, and I can't clone myself, so. But the bottom line is that it really isn't secured. It isn't secured to what it was, and I really appreciate Alderman Como's letter. It was very, very thorough, and thank you so much for doing that research and getting that information. And I know the comment, it was good enough for the federal government, but we all know the federal government gets hacked too. And we know that even unless you're in one of those little phone booth things, even that isn't quite as secure. I worked for the federal government for a very long time, and I know leaks happen and I know things happen. If this is extremely important, and that particular night was extremely important. It was very important for all of us to be there if we could, to hear what had to be said. There was no vote that was we were just being informed.
Yeah.
And I do think it was important for as many of us to be there. No decision was made, so if they hadn't been there, they could have read it afterwards and could have been briefed differently. I just really have an issue, and I know I don't get to vote tonight. I'll only vote on the large board, but I think that sometimes it's inconvenient to get here when we're not on this committee. I know myself. I'm not on this committee and I'm here. I'm not going to be on tomorrow's committee, but I will be there. It is inconvenient all the time, and I know many of you travel, so I'm not trying to poo-poo, and some have families that they have to take care of. But we did sign up to be here. We did sign up to be here before we had Zoom and before we had all of these situations. So if we're being true to those who put us in office, we really need to be true to those that put us in office. So I would hope that you will pass this. Now that I know that the phone is not a direct link right into this room, that it does get filtered through, which I should have known to begin with. I don't think you should put the phone caveat in it either. So I will try to stop talking. Not easy for me.
Alderman Tebow, then Alderman Lopez.
Thank you. I just want to make one point that I think if any of us are speaking, I think the quorum in here is we should not interrupt anyone or make smirks. I think that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. I mean, that's what decorum is about, not I let everyone who speaks speak. I don't interrupt them. I don't laugh. I don't make smirks. And I think that's just the wrong way to show our people of Nashua that we're not taking this seriously. You know, I took his letter seriously, just like you did. I think it's important.
Alderman Tebow, enough. Alderman Lopez.
I'd like to point out as a point of order, because it has been pointed out before, that you should not be identifying individuals specifically when you're talking. You should be talking about legislation and the topic at hand. And I would also like to say, I haven't heard anything that's compelling me to vote in favor of this. At best, I've heard an argument that we should roll back privileges and access to voting that aldermen have had in the past before we had phones, so now we wouldn't even have access to that. And I've heard the argument that if we took our oath of office, we should take our office so seriously that there should be nothing that can ever, interfere with our getting to our committees. Now, this is all coming about because of a committee that gave very short notice about a non-public session. So I think allowing for that human error it goes both ways. Yes, we trust people to turn things off, but we also trust aldermen to show up if they have reasonable opportunities to do that. And I don't think we can predict every opportunity. Some of the aldermen here are parents, some of them have medical issues, and I have served on the board long enough to know that there are a lot of people who may need different access to meetings. And if a non-public session is called in a manner that doesn't allow them to have that, I would err on the side of caution by assuming that they deserve and were elected to have that participation in the meeting, and not assuming that they are actually going to disseminate information illegally or that they're hiding things. So for me, that's where my priorities are, and that's how I see this. I'm not going to support this.
All set.
Yes.
It's been a lively discussion. I think there's been a lot of topics that have brought up. Not totally impressed by the feelings around trust or not trust. If you're put into this office, then we should trust you to be doing what you're supposed to be doing, and there are ways that we can address it if you're not. So that has been frustrating for me. I also think that the point that has been made, that if you happen to be away, because we get so little heads up sometimes, that you don't get to be in these important sessions is just unfair to the people that we are representing. I only jumped on the meeting that we're talking about because I don't usually check the nights that I don't have them. I had my kids and I wanted to listen and there was already a Zoom link. So I was able to listen in. Should I not have had that opportunity? I just think that it is it's a legislation in search of a problem, I think, and we all know that we should be here in person whenever we can, and we all do everything we can to be here. But I don't think it's right to take away someone's ability to be able to do the work that they've been elected to do. So I will not be supporting this. Any further discussion?
Can I?
Alderman Timmons.
Thank you. I would support this. From past experience, I think that we should have everybody here in non-public. Sometimes I didn't make it. So, but that didn't stop me from doing my job. I still did my job. Just because I didn't vote does not mean that I didn't do my job. So you can still do your job without being here. That's just my opinion.
Also,
I will
Alderman
support
Timmons?
it. Mhm.
Okay. Motion on the floor is to recommend final passage. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Is that 3 nays and 2 yeas? That motion fails. We have to dispose of it now, or does it? I never remembered.
So far, you've taken no action.
Well, it failed, so now we have to take an action.
So far, you've taken no action, so you can hold it in committee, you can send it to the Board of Aldermen with no recommendation.
Okay.
You could consider amendments, you can
Okay, thank
do
you.
a lot of things.
Alderman Clemmons, I'm sorry, Alderman Lopez.
Oh, I just want to move to table indefinitely.
Motion is to table indefinitely. We cannot debate that.
Is it table indefinitely, or is it indefinitely postponed?
Yeah, right.
Indefinitely
Indefinitely postponed.
Which
is.
And that is debatable.
To clarify your motion, you would like to,
Move for indefinite postponement.
and that is debatable. Okay.
Recommend
Comments?
to the Board of Aldermen that it be indefinitely postponed.
As a point of order, or a point of clarification to Attorney Bolton, if I table it in this committee without really taking it off at any point, then it has to be
You
voted off.
cannot indefinitely postpone it in committee.
Correct, thank you. But can I table it?
If you want to table it, the motion is to table it. The indefinitely is
Okay, so
unnecessary.
just table it, and then either it gets brought back by members of this committee, or it expires with the legislative year.
Or the Board of Aldermen could vote to remove it from committee.
Okay.
Okay. What is your motion, Alderman Lopez?
I move to table.
New motion is to table. That is not debatable. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
That motion carries. Ordinance 022-028 is on the table. As far as I know, 022-031 is staying on the table until April, which is what it says here. We call for public comment, but there are no members of the public in the chamber. General discussion. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So just want to congratulate Nashville South soccer team. They won their second championship recently. So congratulations to that school and those kids. Also, this week we lost a couple of public servants that were pretty large in Nashville politics. Former DPW Commissioner Tracy Pappas, who I never got to meet at all, so maybe someone else will be able to speak to her a little bit more. Very, very young, too young for this to happen to anyone. It's just awful. And we also lost state representative and former Board of Aldermen in my ward, who my predecessor, Skip Cleaver, who again was, from what people tell me, a giant in this state for the things he's done for the state and for the city. And I know Alderwoman Timmons wanted to have a moment of silence. We could have a moment of silence for both of them. That would be fantastic.
Thank you, Alderman Tebow.
Thank you.
I meant to do that at the beginning of the meeting. I apologize. Skip was an incredible asset to this board and to the city. I did not know Tracy, but I know that also an asset, and it's sad to lose both so close to the holidays. So, Alderman Clemmons?
Yes, thank you. My condolences go out to the family of Skip Cleaver and also to the family of Tracy Pappas. But like was previously mentioned, both served our city. I didn't always agree with Commissioner Pappas. We saw things from a different point of view, but what I can tell you is that she cared deeply about Nashua. And even though we saw things from different sides, we cared about the city, both of us. And that's the one thing I think that that we're missing in politics these days, is that, you know, you can come to the table, you can disagree, but at the end of the day, you know, hopefully your heart is into doing the right thing for the city and not somewhere else. And I can say that at least about Commissioner Pappas. And as far as former Alderman Skip Cleaver, he was a really good asset to the city. He served us well up in Concord as a state rep, and he served Ward 8 well. In the years that I got to know him, mostly through working with the Democratic Party and also through here on the Board of Aldermen, we worked together on a couple of different things. And one of the stories that I like to tell is about Skip is he was not a big fan of the School Street project. He hated it. He hated the way that the design was. He hated everything about it. And he wished that there could be more, you know, that it could be more inclusionary and that sort of thing. And I had a conversation with him and I said, but Skip, I said, I understand, I get all your concerns. I said, but between you and me, I said, if we build this, it's gonna help the housing in this city. And I know you think it's ugly, but it's gonna add apartments to the city, and we desperately need that. I said, and the side benefit is, I said, we've got the compromise here where people are gonna be able to park underneath there for the businesses that surround it. I said, it's a compromise. I said, and third, I said, it's gonna help finance the Performing Arts Center. I said, and I know you're a big supporter of that. And Skip was like, well, I don't know. And at the end of the day, Skip came around and he supported it. And that's the kind of guy that Skip was. Because he's somebody that saw the bigger picture. He saw the greater good. Mm-hmm. Even though he might not have necessarily, that wasn't his thing, right? And he would have done it 100% different. At the end of the day, Skip knew how to compromise, and Skip knew what was gonna be good for the city. And we need more of that in politics. We really, really do. And he will be somebody that I miss. Thank you.
Alderman Lopez and Alderman Cleve.
Well, I appreciate my fellow alderman's comments. He said a lot of what I would want to say very articulately. Particularly amused by the story about Skip, because I had almost the same conversation with him, and so I'm starting to realize that he was struggling more with that than I thought he was. But again, to his credit, he, just because there's preferences or ideas that you start out with a sense of what something should be or how it should be, doesn't mean that you can't be introduced to the value that it could add to the city, and I think he saw that, and I appreciate that. I also remember having some conversations, some of them a little bit frictious, I guess, with Commissioner Pappas. And I mean, she said at one point, well, if you disagree with me, you can vote for me. Well, but I keep getting elected, don't I? And I was like, you do. So her record, regardless of my agreement with it, does speak for herself, or speak for itself. And I do think that it's important, as my fellow alderman said, that we remember that it is a big city, and there are going to be people who don't agree with us, and they do get elected, and we will have to figure out how to make policy. And that disagreement doesn't make the city weaker, it makes the discernment for policy stronger. So I appreciate everyone's willingness to express differing opinions around the horseshoe. Thank you.
Alderman Lopez, all set. Alderman Cleve.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. the former Commissioner Pappas is and was my constituent, as well as a colleague to us here on the board. I remember when I first ran as a constituent, I was going around asking people, may I put up a sign? And the first thing she said was yes, that I could put up a sign, but wanted me to know that every sign was going to be, because she wasn't going to play partisan politics. So my sign went up right next to the person I was running against, and I actually thought that was one of the funniest things. She was very inclusive in that way. Tracy and I had many disagreements on things that were happening in Ward 3, as well as within the city. And I once said to her, when she was running the last time, and I know she did not win, but I said to her, the Board of Public Works lives in Ward 3. And she sat and she looked at me and I said, every candidate running is in Ward 3. Every candidate serving is from Ward 3, until Paul Shea moved. When Commissioner Shea moved, everybody was from Ward 3. And she reminded me that Ward 3 is extremely engaging. And I said to her, it's because, you know, people such as herself that were willing to put signs side by side. So I am very sorry for her passing, and more sorry for her family and the loss that they've taken. Now to, I don't know whether to call him former representative or former alderman, but he was the Honorable Skip Cleaver. In 2016, we both ran for the State House in Concord, and we both won. So we went up there as what we called ourselves, the Nashua 27. Yeah. There were 27 of us from one party. But regardless, the next time when there were 26 Democrats and one Republican, we still called ourselves the Nashua 27, because we were 27 state reps. And I remembered someone said to Skip, no, it's only the Nashua 26. And he said, no, it's the Nashua 27, because we are 27 people from Nashua. I've known Skip Cleaver very long time with a blank spot in the middle. Over 40 years ago was the first time I met him through the Gate City Striders when Richard was running. Skip recruited him after he had had a very successful race to run a relay. And I shared that story with many of you the night before and the day of. So I won't belabor that, but Skip believed in what Skip believed in. And it wasn't always easy to change his mind. But the thing I want to tell everybody was, at the end, when he was so sick, he could barely walk, he came to the Bedford Sport Complex. He sat in that chair and he was in pain. I mean, you could see the physical pain, but he was true to the people who had voted for him, and he sat through all of that. And I remember the day was getting into the night, and it was getting very long, and there was one important vote coming up, and he had a doctor's appointment at Mass General. And he went to stand up and he said, no, I have to stay here for this vote. And he was standing there. He had two people on each side of him and one behind him trying to hold him up. And I ran over, got a chair, and I said, well, if you're staying, you're sitting. But he was physically going to try to stand there through all of that because it meant so much to him. So we just moved the chair closer to the door because we had little clickers. He didn't have to sit in a particular seat, but he was dedicated to those people who put him in office and to his entire ward. And he's going to be missed by so many people. And I knew it was coming, but it's always hard.
Alderman Gavea, then Alderman Timmons. It seems as though we've moved on to remarks by the alderman, so we'll just finish.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, to go along the same lines, Nashua lost two really dedicated people to the city, and although I didn't get to know Rep. Cleaver very well, I met him in passing a few times, always had good conversation with him. Commissioner Pappas, when I decided to run for this position, out of the blue get a call, and she just starts grilling me on DPW issues. And then we get halfway through the conversation, she's like, oh yeah, I don't even live in your ward, I just want to know where you stand on this. And I'm like, okay. And we had some really good conversations, and she would bring up points that just I never thought of and points out, maybe go, well, I have to, look into that and research that. And, she always made me think and always brought up a different viewpoint. And although we didn't agree a lot of the time, and sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't, she would always take the call and was always there to talk to me and try to see how I felt on issues. And I thought that was interesting as somebody running in Ward 1, and she lived in Ward 3. So I always enjoyed our conversations with her. She'll be missed.
Is that Alderman Timmons?
Yes, thank you. My condolences for the Pappas family. I had only one conversation with Tracy, and I asked her, was she any kin to the Pappases in Manchester? And she told me no. So that was the only thing. I really didn't know her that well. Just that one conversation, I thought that would open the door, but I think she was a little leery because she didn't know my views. So that was it. But as far as Skip, I can't say enough about him, and you guys know his heart and the level of patience that he had and the kindness that he had. And he said one time to me, he said, you catching hell on that school board, but I'm gonna tell you, kill him with kindness. That's what he told me. He said, and I was like, you know what, the more kind I get, the more haters come out. He said, still kill them with kindness. That's the way Skip was. He just was a principal fellow. I just love him. And he said, you'll make it through. That's what he said. Don't give up. Just know who you are. And that was Skip. He just was a good guy. And I can't say anything negative about him. There wasn't anything. We agreed on the same things. We were like-minded. And it was very easy for me with him.
Alderman Camone.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I also just wanted to extend my condolences to the Cleaver and the Pappas families. I also had never met Skip before. All I really know is what I saw on TV watching these meetings before I was elected, but he definitely seemed like a good guy, and I know that he had a lot of friends in this room, so my thoughts and prayers go out to all of you and all of you that knew them and their families as well. Thank you.
I wasn't going to tell the story, but now I feel like I should. I was with Skip on election night 2016, and he came up to my office, and this is my favorite memory of him. He's sitting on my hot pink couch, and he is just glowing, and he's just like, yeah, not talking to anybody. He was just like effervescent with the excitement of the election, and I will always keep that in my mind. All right, are we all set? Do I have a motion?
Yeah.
Were you?
Usually it's Alderman Clemens, but I can do it. All right.
Alderman Lopez.
I would move to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
We are adjourned at 8:20.
Finally got to vote about that.